Fall is my favorite time of year. All of my family and friends are summer people. Camping, beaches, barbecues, lazy days at the lake and fishing. All summer long they're doing something, getting tanned and sweating. Well, myself? Hell, I'd rather avoid having a heat stroke and do all my outdoor activities in the fall. Oddly enough, I'm the only one who likes to hike too. This doesn't really bother me. You see, I like being by myself in the woods. So every year, near the end of September, there is an up-mountain race to see who could get to the top of Buffalo Mountain first. When it first started, it wasn't a big deal and only a few people registered for the event. Now it's kind of a big deal around here. There are cash prizes and a cookout afterwards. Everyone donates non-perishables to the Second Harvest Food Bank, and most of the time, the entrants who win cash prizes donate the money to a charity of their choice, too. Now, I've never won the event, but I do participate every single year, and it never fails that this event makes me want to start my hiking season. The leaves are just starting to turn, the air is clear and clean, and the sky is the color of a blue that only happens in the Appalachians in the fall. After last year's event, I flopped onto the ground at the top of the mountain and waited for all the other entrants to load into the shuttle back that goes to the bottom of the mountain. There were enough of us that it was going to take the van 2 trips to get us all. I volunteered to stay behind and wait to go back down. I was tired. I'm not as young as I used to be, and it took me quite a while to recuperate. As I sat catching my breath and trying to cool down, I heard a couple of the others talking about some strange creature they had encountered on Klingman's dome. I half listened to them, amused. I'd grown up in the mountains and had seen all kinds of crazy-looking critters. It's amazing how a bad case of mange can make a black bear suddenly look like a nightmare version of the chupacabra. I figured the guys had seen some similar appearance-altering condition on an otherwise normal animal, and well, it probably spooked them. By the time the shuttle arrived again, we were all involved in the storytelling. You see, another hiker had seen a similar animal closer to my home in the Unicoi Mountains, usually known as the Unaka Mountains. These mountains are situated along the Tennessee-North Carolina border. Now, here's a bit of a history lesson just to set the scene and to clarify why I thought these hikers had simply seen a normal animal and thought it was something else. The name, Unicoi Domes, from the Cherokee word Unega, which means white. It refers to the fog and low clouds that hang over the southern Appalachian Mountains on humid days or early in the mornings. The word, Unaka, has the same root and meaning as Unicoi. So, if you're hiking along while the fog is thick, the forest becomes a place where your imagination could run wild. Now, I told the story about the black bear with mange. I got a couple shots of him on my cell phone's camera. I posted the pictures online, and everyone who saw it had an idea what it could be, and their guesses ranged from the ever-popular chupacabra to an alien werewolf. Well, when I revealed what it was, nobody believed me. The guys in the van had no opinion about my story. Some rolled their eyes and politely turned away from me, preferring to get back to their scary cryptid stories. It was my turn to roll my eyes and ignore them. You see, cryptozoology was a fun pastime, a hobby, a tool for science fiction and fantasy writers to explore, and nothing more. At least, not in my opinion. At least, not until I had my own experience. The 3rd week of October rolled around, and I had forgotten about the cryptid stories told that day at the Buffalo Mountain Race. I was stoked and ready to hit the trails for 3 weeks of undiluted peace and a fair amount of solitude. Usually, I would run into hikers from the Appalachian Trail, and we would end up sitting around a campfire telling stories for at least one night. It was okay. I didn't mind it. Most of the hikers were colorful characters. I took my gear and headed out in the old beater truck. It was an '89 Toyota that had a flat wooden bed, since the other had rusted away years and years ago. I kept it specifically for these trips because it would remain parked in a remote location for the duration of my hiking trip. If it was vandalized or stolen, well, I'd got my money's worth out of that thing by 1999. I drove into Dark Hollow, crossed the creek, followed the road far up toward the top, and turned onto an old logging road that was no more than an overgrown trail. Logging back there had come to a halt about 30 years ago. No one bothered going that far in a vehicle anymore, so I didn't worry much about the old truck. It was early morning, just past sunup, and that heavy, shrouding fog I spoke of earlier hung in the mountains, dampening sounds and making me feel as if I were the last person on Earth. A few of the fiery colored leaves had fallen onto the path, and they crunched underfoot as I made my way. Another journey begun. I loved it. I carried a walking stick my grandfather had made me when I was a kid, and after he retired, that's how he made extra money. The stick brought back pleasant childhood memories of my time spent with the old man as he whittled and carved on the walking sticks. And of course, he told me stories too. Birds dipped and flitted along the trees as they sang. Their high, piercing voices echoed even in the thick fog. I walked slowly, deliberately, and made sure to thump the end of the walking stick against the ground in front of me with each step. My grandfather had taught me to do that when I was only 5 or 6. He said the vibrations would alert any snakes on the path of my approach, and they would slither away before I got to them. I never knew if this was true or not, but I've never had a run-in with a snake on the trail, so maybe it was. Anyway, a white-tailed deer ran down the slopes as I walked, and her yearling followed, bounding across the path close enough for me to touch. Startled, I stood still for a moment and listened for more deer who might leap in front of me. Later that evening, as I neared the spot where I would make camp for the night, a squirrel took interest in me. He followed my progress but stayed just out of reach. If I turned to him, he bolted up the nearest tree and barked at me. He continued to follow me until I made camp. I left him some unsalted peanuts at the edge of my camp so I could watch him from the doorway of my tent. The small fire I laid was just to keep animals away. It was not cold enough even at night to need it for warmth. The next morning, I woke up at 3 o'clock, feeling as if I'd been startled awake by some sudden loud noise, but I'd heard nothing. I listened intently for several minutes, straining to hear the sounds of some predator animal or perhaps a person. There's nothing there. I quietly unzipped the tent's door and peeked into the darkness. The moon offered only a hazy bit of light. I saw no movement and still heard nothing. But my nerves were jangled. And so I sat there, in the open doorway of my tent, just completely unable and unwilling to try to sleep anymore. 10 minutes after taking up my position, crickets, tree frogs, and owls started making their night noises again, and that's when I realized that it had been dead silent when I woke up. Something had come through that had caused all the insects and animals to fall silent for a while. I didn't like that. My mind went instantly to big predators. You know, mountain lions, bears, coyotes, bobcats. It was the first time in years that I had been afraid while camping alone. After I packed up my camp, I searched a wide perimeter for predator tracks and found nothing but deer and small game tracks. All throughout the day, though, I had that feeling of being watched. Several times I had to force myself to stop and turn around to prove nothing was behind me. My fight-or-flight mechanism would kick in, and I wanted to run, but that would only lead to more panic and possibly an injury. I knew I had to keep a level head if I wanted to stay safe. On my 5th day, I took a shortcut and was traversing a deep ravine, moving upwards slowly and steadily, when I heard a guttural bark of laughter. It was short but very loud. I turned quickly and lost my footing, and I slid halfway down the steep incline, cursing the whole way. When I got stopped, I scanned to the other side of the ravine, and then up the mountain, then down as far as I could see. I didn't see a thing. I was wondering if my mind had been playing tricks on me. Or was there something following me? Scarier still was the idea that it was somebody following me. I hurried up the ravine and made a mental note not to take any more shortcuts. Back on the trail, I kept looking over my shoulder, certain that something or someone was tailing me. It ruined my whole day. Hell, I couldn't enjoy anything for the constant fear and paranoia. The next morning, I woke up again before dawn to that same eerie dead silence. I found tracks about 10 feet outside the perimeter of my campsite, but they were unlike any tracks I'd ever seen. Imagine a hoof print from a small horse. Now soften the outline until it looks like a soft hoof made the print, and you'll have a fair idea of what it looked like. It was bipedal, which completely freaked me out. There are no two-legged animals around here. Some animals can walk on their hind feet for varying distances, but this thing had circled my camp several times with no evidence of having 4 feet. Of course, there's no cell service that far back in the mountains either. It wasn't like I could just call in the rangers. A cold chill settled in my bones as I thought about my options, and I didn't have many. I could keep walking the way I was headed. I would be close to a small rural neighborhood within a day or two, or I could turn back. My truck was several days behind me, so I really had no choice, and I had to keep moving forward. The enjoyment of my annual hiking trip just completely went out the window. All I cared about was getting the hell out of the woods, off that mountain, back to civilization. I did have the presence of mind to get a few shots of the tracks that the thing made. I walked as fast as I could that day, not stopping for more than 5 minutes at a time. The last rest stop I took was at 5 that evening, and that's when I noticed the silence had once again descended on the mountain. The squirrels, usually noisy and rambunctious, had stopped all their chattering and barking. No deer ran through the woods. Nothing moved. Even the air had gone still. Panicked, I peered closely at every bush, every shadow, every dip in the land and outcrop of rocks, trying to get a look at the thing tracking me. That's what it was doing, right? I mean, what else could it be called at that point? I set off again at a fast pace before the fear could lock me into place. The crunch of dead leaves underfoot was no longer something to be nostalgic about. It was a constant reminder that everything died eventually, including me. My death might come sooner rather than later if I didn't get off the mountain. Now finally, I made it to the point on the mountain where it was too high for deciduous trees. There were only pines that close to the top. The pine needles were soft and noiseless as I continued my uphill journey. The air was thinner, and that made me slow down. It's not so thin that it'll kill you, but you definitely notice it, and have to slow down or you could pass out. Unconsciousness was something I did not want to be, not with that thing following me. Darkness forced me to stop for the night, but I didn't bother setting up a tent. There was no way I was going to sleep that night. The moon was nearly full, so I could see pretty well in the large clearing. I made a big fire that night and kept it stoked, sitting close, even though sweat rolled off of me. Even predatory animals avoided fire. Now around 4:30 in the morning, the thick fog rolled in, and I cursed it. It was thick, and hanging that high up on the mountain, it was more like a low-hanging cloud. The fire's light flickered and danced on the whiteness, making it impossible to see into its depths. And that's when I heard the guttural barking and growling again. It seemed to be coming from all sides, and it was close. Now logically, I should have seen the thing moving, it was so close, but I saw nothing but the movement of flames and the slow approach of more thick mist rolling toward me. Finally, fear did its job and froze me to the spot. I couldn't move one way or the other for fear that I might run into the creature making that terrifying sound. The mist hung above the ground a few inches, and I did muster up the nerve to lean down to try to look under it for the feet of the thing. The crackle of the fire hid the sounds of movement, but the legs and misshapen feet were there all right. I counted 6 sets of them. 6 unknown creatures moving closer to me, hidden in the thick fog. The feet looked like hooves made of fatty tissue, distended almost to the point of bursting with each step. I scurried to the other side of the fire, farthest from where I'd seen those feet, and I looked up to the hazy sky, praying that sunrise would hurry. It was almost 5:15 by then, and I knew I couldn't remain where I was for long. Those things were closing in and spreading out. They would surround me soon, and I wouldn't have a way out. I lit the end of a large stick and stood. The fog was thinning, but not much. Turning my back to the fire, I fanned the flaming stick in front of me, trying to find my backpack. I had propped it against a large rock close by, but it was gone. Deciding it wouldn't be an irreplaceable loss, I started down the other side of the mountain in the general direction where I knew there would be a rural neighborhood. A couple of 100 feet down, the fog had cleared to a light mist, and I stopped just long enough to douse the fiery end of the stick in the soft dirt of the trail. I didn't see any of the creatures following me, so I turned back and jogged down the steeper parts of the mountain. It wasn't long before I reached the bottom. The land flattened out, and I could see the first big farm in the distance. I laughed aloud. You see, relief flooded me as I walked out of the tree line. However, that laughter died quickly as I was faced with a barbed wire fence. Whoever owned the land had attached the wire to the trees. There were so many horizontal lines of wire that it made a veritable wall. There was no way through it, and it ran as far as I could see to my right and about 100 feet to my left. I ran to the left. At the end, the fence took a 90-degree turn and ran the length of the property. Without thinking, I set off following the fence, determined to get out of the woods and to safety before those things caught up to me. At the midpoint of the property line, something growled, followed by a scream. It stopped me dead in my tracks. It was directly beside me, just inside the tree line. Sunrise had come, but it had not lit the inside of the forest on that side of the mountain yet, so the shadows were deep, dark, and impenetrable. I eased forward. The thing growled, and then another one answered directly behind me. They had cut off my escape. I didn't dare look back. I didn't want to see it after all. I put my hands on the fence. Thankfully, there was no current. And then bushes rustled ahead of me to my left, and my breath caught in my chest, burning my lungs. The creature stepped out and moved to the center of my path. It was about 3.5 feet tall, had long, scraggly black hair that seemed to move about in the air like whiskers or feelers on an ant. Its eyes were huge round pools of glossy black, and its skin was thick and molted with thick scars. Shorter, lighter hair covered the rest of its body down to its knees. In its left hand, it held my walking stick. The thing grinned and my blood froze. It showed 2 rows of pointed teeth. Some were broken and some were missing, but the one still there had only one job, and it was tearing flesh off of its prey. Now, I'm not a small guy, hell, I'm 6'2" and I weigh in at 220, but those creatures, whatever the hell they were, scared me worse than anything I'd ever encountered before. Now, the barbed wire fence didn't seem so bad once I was facing 6 of the troll-like carnivores. I don't remember breathing or even contemplating my next move. I just turned and put my foot on a strand of the wire, and simultaneously pulled up on the next strand and vaulted myself through the opening. It wasn't that simple, though. I ended up having 42 stitches to close all the cuts, and one of those things actually clamped down on my foot, biting through my shoe and puncturing my skin. But in the end, hell, I made it. I stood and ran as best as I could with my injuries, yelling and screaming at the top of my lungs. The old man who lived in the farmhouse called for an ambulance. I didn't tell the doctors that a small tribe of these creatures chased me through the barbed wire. I didn't want to end up in the psychiatric unit. I told them it was a bear. I listened carefully to all hikers' stories now, just to see if anyone else had ever run into anything like that. So far, no one has. I'm not doing my annual hikes anymore. Somewhere out there, a nasty creature has my walking stick. So if you're ever in the Tennessee or Carolina mountains, and you find a walking stick with a carved bear's head for the top, well, I would advise you to get the hell out of there, and fast.